All right, hello everyone. Welcome to our third webinar in the Rural Grocery Succession Planning webinar series. We are going to get started in just a couple minutes. But before we do, while we're waiting for folks to log on, just let us know in the chat, where are you logging in from? What is your connection to rural grocery? We have had people calling in from all over the country. We've had grocers join us. We've had people who are interested in getting into grocery join us, economic developers, extension professionals. So let us know, what is your connection? What brings you here today to the webinar? And where are you tuning in from? So let us know in the chat. Be sure when you type your answers into the chat that you're sharing your answers with everyone, because otherwise it'll just be sent to the panelists. So we will get started in just another minute or so, but let us know, where are you logging in from and what is your connection to rural grocery? All right, well, I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to the third installment of the Rural Grocery Succession Planning webinar series. My name is Erica Blair. I am a program manager with the Rural Grocery Initiative, which is a unit within K-State Research and Extension. And we work with communities all across Kansas and across the nation to support locally owned rural grocery stores. So we're very excited to have you joining us today to really dig into this crucial topic of business transition planning. And before we begin, we want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, the Ewing, Marion Kaufman Foundation, for making this webinar series possible. And if you are joining us for the very first time, we want to just take a quick moment to share a little bit about this webinar series. So we are hosting these webinars monthly throughout 2022. It's really a continuation of our previous work supporting grocers through business transition planning, and it's a continuation of the webinar series we hosted in 2021 called Keeping Groceries Alive. That webinar series really covered many key succession planning topics, but business transition planning is so important and complex that we're really following up on some of those topics that were covered from last year and exploring additional topics this year. So please be sure to check out that webinar series for additional resources and additional case studies on succession planning. So what we want to do throughout 2022 is highlight resource providers, identify key considerations, present options, and really share different examples of grocery ownership transitions. And this is because we recognize that business transitions can take many different forms. They're all going to be unique depending on the store situation, their identity, their community, and so many other factors. But even so, with all of these examples looking slightly differently, there are lessons that we can learn from others who have gone through this process. So that's really what we hope you take out of this. Business transition planning is so important for maintaining food access in rural communities and for securing the financial futures of grocers. So we have additional resources that you can access on this topic at ruralgrocery.org. So before we begin, I have just a couple quick housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded. You can find all the previous recordings at ruralgrocery.org under the events tab. We will also have time at the end for Q&A. So if you have questions during this presentation, You can ask them in the Q&A box. You can also share any comments that you have in the chat box. So with that, we can go ahead and dive into today's topic. So today we are going to be hearing about how a business transition kept Fall River Market alive. And we're really excited to be able to feature Paul Adams and Carrie Berger of the BSR group. They have a tremendous amount of experience helping grocers navigate this process. They'll be speaking with the previous owner of Fall River Market, Dave Vance, as well as the current owner, Stacy Vickery. But before that, just a little bit of context before we begin. So Fall River is located in Greenwood County. It has a population of about 150 people, and the majority of those residents are retirees. There are also many farmers and ranchers who live outside of town as well. And the community is really very well known for its recreational opportunities. Fall River Market and the Flint Oak Hunting Lodge bring a lot of people into the community as well. And Fall River Market has been an establishment in the community for a very long time. Speaking with community members, it's believed that the store has been there since the early 1900s. Now, the Rural Grocery Initiative works with some of the smallest stores across the country, and this is an example of one of those stores. It's a small format grocery store with a limited assortment of items. There's also a cafe at the store, and it's an example of how these kinds of retail outlets can be part of the solution to overcoming food access challenges in rural areas. It's a really important source of food for residents. But as you'll hear in today's webinar, sourcing and distribution is a major issue for a store of this size. And it takes a lot of innovation and ingenuity to come up with solutions. So even a grocery store of this size needs to be planning for business transition so that it can continue to exist and continue to be a critical source of food for the community. So this store underwent a business transition in May of 2021. And that's what we're going to be hearing about today, as well as what it's like to operate a store of this size in a small rural community. So today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Paul Adams and Carrie Berger of the BSR group interviewed the previous owner and the current owner of Fall River Market, and we will be sharing clips of those recorded conversations today. So first we will be hearing from Dave Vance about what it was like to exit the store, followed by Paul and Carrie discussing some key takeaways and lessons learned from that experience. And then we will hear from Stacy Vickery about what it was like to enter the business, again, followed by a discussion between Paul and Carrie. And since this is just one example of a unique business transition, Paul and Carrie will also be looking at sort of the bigger picture and share some of the wisdom that they've acquired over the years about different characteristics of business transitions and different things that can be done to make a business transition smooth and successful. So with all of that being said, we're ready to go ahead and listen to the story of Fall River Market. And just a reminder, as you're listening, feel free to use the Q&A box and the chat box so that we can have a discussion at the end of the webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that video up right now. And we will go ahead and get started.
Hi, everybody. I'm Paul Adams. I'm in Olathe, Kansas, and I primarily work with independent retailers and wholesalers. And I also work with Carrie Berger, and Carrie will tell us a little bit about who we are.
Hi, I'm Carrie Berger. I'm an attorney with a background in psychology and finance. I've been working in the grocery business for about half the amount of time that Paul has, which means I've been working in the grocery business for about 30 years. So what we do is we work with independent business owners, and that first word in independent is independent. And we recognize that you already know how to make good decisions. Just give me the facts and I can make my own choices. That's our job, is not to make any decisions. We don't get that we don't have that right to make any decisions, but we have a responsibility to help you to gather the information so you can make your own informed decisions. So that's what we do. We are the BSR group, and you get a hold of us at www.biz, B-I-Z, crossroads, crossroads.com. bizcrossroads.com. That's also where you'd find our email address. So it's cburger@bizcrossroads.com and padams@bizcrossroads.com. So now today we're going to be talking with David Vance, and his lovely wife Ruthie is not available today, but you'll hear a little bit about her while he's talking as well. David was the elder generation selling to the next generation, and he's going to talk to us about both what it was like to get into and to run that business, and also what it was like to be able to make the decision to get out of that business and transition it to the next leader.
Well, tell us, how did you become an owner of the market when you took it over?
Well, Billy Ecton, he's a local farmer. He bought it. He had owned it since like 2010, I believe, and kept it running. And we were working, like I said, working in post office in Wichita, and we had talked about it some. He was like, well, when you retire, would you want to do this? And more or less, I agreed to go ahead and take it over. And we took over in 2018. For me, it was more like a community service type deal. The store has to keep going because the store is the heartbeat of the town. If that store was not here, I think the town would basically cease to exist. So, we came out with intentions of keeping it going, and Billy was getting to the point trying to keep up with his farm and everything like that. He's like, how soon can you do it? And it's like, okay, Father's Day of 2018 is when I took over, but I retired from the post office in January of 18, and I spent February, March, April, May, whatever out here during that time frequenting the store quite a bit. I'd sit in there and see how things were going. I even help out every once in a while just to get the hang of things. But yeah, it was and business was not booming at all by the time we took over. I mean, they did as much business all day probably as we do at lunch now. There just wasn't the traffic or anything. So to get it going, you had to increase what we carried, more merchandise in the store, and started having lunch, a daily special for lunches every day to get people in, and that that brought more people in, and finding out what people want. And we'd even take special orders. And when we went into Wichita to pick up groceries, we'd go to Sam's or Costco and pick up bulk items for people and bring them back out. And gradually, the traffic increased.
So it sounds like you used a similar marketing method for when it came time for you to sell it to Stacy.
Yeah.
A certain amount of serendipity, or you can call it luck, but paying attention.
We had my wife and I had talked about putting it on the market pretty soon, but we hadn't actually done that, and we didn't have the time because, like I said, running your own business is a full-time job. And me, I'd worked at the post office 34 years, and she was there 24, and it's like, well, we're retired, and we really do want to retire and do something else, maybe get a travel trailer and travel some and things like that. And we can't do it, so we talked about putting it on the market, and that's when, lo and behold, not long after that, they was having the St. Patrick's dinner at the community building, and Stacy was there, and my wife was there, and Ruthie mentioned something about selling the store, and I guess Stacy was like, well, I'd like to buy the store. so that's where the talk started at, was there. And then her and Travis came over numerous times. They went through the paperwork with him and bank statements I had, and showed him how much we were bringing in, but we were also spending about the same amount, where she could change a few things to make some more income. Because for me, I really wasn't concerned with income that much because my wife and I both draw retirement from the post office as well as 401k, and then we both get Social Security. Our main thing was just getting the grocery store running where people actually wanted to come in and be there.
Truth be told, I think in many ways that's probably the story in a lot of these really small towns. It's kind of like you just sort of meet somebody and it works or it doesn't, because it's hard to describe what you've got there in a town
Right.
like Fall River. How do you, how do you find somebody who doesn't already know and like this place and get them to come by and be interested? So now for a lot of people, the store has been their livelihood, and in a small community, it may or may not have a great big value for them to quote retire off of. So if you were talking to somebody, it sounds like as if your advice is build your retirement by saving your money, investing it, putting it aside, having it whatever. And so the selling of a store in a small town may or may not actually be your source of the lion's share of your retirement income. Is that sort of what you're saying, or is that sound advice in your mind?
Oh yeah, more or less for us that was true because we already had our retirement secured because we'd worked so many years somewhere else. When we bought the store, it was especially a town this size, like I said, it was more like community service. We increased the business, which we want to do, and make it a place where everybody wanted to come. Sold it to Stacy for more than what we paid for it. Not a whole lot, but it's like a town this size, it'd be tough to retire off of your store income unless you really put a bunch away. You need to have some savings, especially going into. You need to have some savings. So there's things you want to do to it that you're going to have some upfront money because your cash flow is not that much that you'd be able to finance a whole lot of things. So yeah, you need to have some backup when you go into it.
In bigger stores, the wholesalers will provide numbers they should be asking for products on so they can get their margins. How did you decide what the right margin would be when you sold stuff? Because you did that. You may not have thought about it too deeply, but you had to do it, so you had cash.
Yeah. Well, there was a convenience store supplier that I got a lot of things from. But like everybody else, nobody wants to deliver here. I was driving to Fredonia once a week to get a certain amount of supplies from the supplier that it's Douglas Company. They supply Pistol Pete's convenience stores. So I was driving there to get a lot of merchandise and bringing it back myself. Well, on their sheet, their basic markup was 40%. So that's kind of the standard I use for most things, unless I had some products that were actually delivered and I didn't have to go pick them up. Then I went by 25%.
Okay.
And a lot of stuff. I mean, Stacy's getting a lot more delivered than we did, which is to her benefit. I mean, we were driving a lot, going to Wichita to Sam's, Costco, Walmart, Kroger, you name it, just to get better prices.
Yeah.
Because some things they mark up so much you really couldn't sell them. I mean, the convenience store suppliers, they'll sell it to you, but at the price they're selling it to you, if you mark it up, nobody's going to want to buy it. Even here, they don't want to buy it.
Yeah.
So you try to find a happy medium on all those things where you can sell it make a profit and people still want to buy it. It's not so high that they don't turn their nose and walk away.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about from your own point of view, it was my time of life. And, whether you had been in there, in your case, for just a few years, or if you'd been in there for, 30 years, there's a point at which it's your time of life. It's when you're ready to do what's next. And I think
Right.
that's one of the questions. If you could talk about that a little bit to the folks that are, maybe they've owned a small town store for a number of years and they're getting to that place. Tell us what you think would be kind of the indicators that you're at that time of life, that maybe it's time to think about what might be next instead.
Well, for us, it was more or less realizing that we didn't have time to do other things that we wanted to do. And the clock is ticking. sand's going down in the dial there. You run out of sand. It's like there's things I want to accomplish in my life, and there are things I want to do. So you can kind of see that more or less we'd said when we bought the store, we'd probably give it 5 years, is what my wife and I discussed. We give it 5 years and try to get it going and get it better, and then look to move on. And we did it in 3, so that that was good. But yeah, there's other things to accomplish in life. It's not all, you don't want to work your entire life. I want to stay busy. I'm not anybody that can just sit around. I want to stay busy, but I want to be able to also get away and travel and see other family members and things. And so it's just time to have a little more freedom. And that's when Stacy came along, being that much younger. Like I said, the store actually needed somebody that still was willing to work and wanted to work and wanted to make the improvements that needed to be made.
You and Tracy went into it for different reasons in a way, because she looked at it as 20 years. You looked at it as much fewer.
Right.
You were almost a bridge between Billy's business and somebody else's.
Yeah. And I think that was probably my idea when I went into it too. I wasn't looking long term because I knew I wanted to retire and actually pursue some other interests. And we were just fortunate. And I think Stacy was the right person. I mean, there's some things that needed to be done. And her husband, Travis, is a handyman, which I'm not. So he could make improvements at the store for a lot less than I could have, because I would have had to have hired everything done.
Yeah.
And he can do a lot of the things himself. Like they've put in central heat and air there, which we did not have. Man, right now they're building on and expanding the kitchen some. But I think it will continue to get better, though. I really do.
If there's one thing that I'm not quite giving you a magic wand, so to speak, but if there, from a practical point of view, if there was one thing you could give to any small town grocer, something that you think they really most need, what would be that one thing that you would want them to have?
Boy, well, it'd be nice if you could get one company to actually deliver everything you needed, so you didn't have to search so hard to find it. Because Stacy has done a lot more on that front than I have, because she's called numerous vendors trying to find the best deal for getting things in there. That's the biggest problem. They all, all the chains, your Walmart, your dollar stores, whatever, they all get better prices. They all buy by the truckload and they all get deliveries. Whereas here, I mean, if they're going to deliver to you, some of them are going to be such an unreasonable price. Like I said, you couldn't sell it. That's why we went out and bought so much on our own. It's just, I can't sell it for that. So I'm going to drive to Walmart and get a bunch of this, because I can buy the Walmart price and sell it here, and it'll still be about like G&W's price. It won't be that much. But it's like getting somebody to deliver to the small towns. It's like they're right on the way. Even Frito-Lay chips, okay? They go right down the highway past us to G&W. They will not turn down the road and deliver. We order off the Frito website, and they're shipped via UPS. And so the prices are always pre-printed on there. So you actually have to charge what's on the bag, because we don't get any special deals like they do, where, when you see a great sale at Walmart or whatever, everything's half price. Well, that's nice, but shoot, they're selling them for less than we can buy them for in a small town, which, that really kind of irks me, but it makes it really difficult to be a small business and survive.
Well, that was great, getting a chance to listen to Dave and tell his story about him and his wife Ruthie, and their passion for their community, and actually they kind of just recognized, hey, we need to do this just because it needs to be done, and I think they had some fun with it. So that passion about being in this grocery business in a small town, and really being a people person, I thought that came through loud and clear. Paul, what did you think as you listened to him tell his story of how he got in?
Well, I totally agree. And I think that one thing that caught my attention as he talked is the fact that store becomes a community center, especially in a smaller town. And he used the term outpost, which is to say when they choose what products they're going to carry in the store, they really carry the products that are needed by the local community. And I like that term, the outpost, and how you have to really know the people in the community, know what their needs are, and then as best as you can, meet those needs.
The other thing I heard him talk about was the idea that, especially when you're first getting going, you very likely will be spending more money than you're bringing in. The need to have reserves, the need to have the money to be able to get into and survive the ups and downs of being a grocer in any business, any community, but especially in a very small community. That was really sound advice on his part. What'd you hear on the financial side of
Well,
in this business?
not to be overly repetitious, but if you don't have some sort of a cash cushion coming in, and it's going to vary depending on the situation. But if you don't have that, because he made the comment that that first year is really tough, you make a lot of mistakes. Once you make them, you probably don't make them again, but those mistakes can be very costly. So if you come in on a shoestring and you don't have anything to back it up with, the situation could not be pleasant at points. He made a comment about the fact that sometimes it's good if you have talent with regard to hammer and nail and being able to do things yourself, because if you have to go out and hire people to come in and do all those things, it can really add to your expenses. It's not like some businesses that are bigger and they can afford to bring in outsiders to do repairs and maintenance. Often in a small store, you've got to be able to figure out how to do it yourself.
Well, in Dave's case, it turned out that that store seems to have sort of a lucky charm. He was able to just sort of accidentally run into the store when he was just enjoying the town, and made the decision and had the interaction with the then owner to be able to buy it. So that owner didn't have to market it. He just, the buyer found him. And then lo and behold, it happened a second time. His buyer, same thing. She was in there for St. Patty's Day and buying corned beef, and lo and behold, they started a conversation. The next thing you know, she's the owner of the store. Now, not everybody can rely on serendipity quite that strongly, but I will say this, that a big part of what happens with luck is we make our own luck. Luck is when opportunity meets preparation. And so bear in mind that part of, though that was lucky, part of what happened there was that, number one, he had a realistic idea about what he was asking for. If he thinks he's selling this for a gajillion dollars, he's not going to bump into anybody who's going to be saying that. There's no luck that's going to make that happen. So that realistic preparation of knowing what it was he had and what it might really be worth and be willing to do that, that was the first piece of his own luck, his preparation that allowed that to happen. And then the second thing was paying attention. He knew that he and his wife knew that they were heading that direction. They were paying attention when the hints were made or the conversation was started. They had their ears open to it. And so really that methodology isn't terrible and isn't totally just luck. There's a good deal of preparation and recognition of the situation. But the question then comes up, well, okay, beyond serendipity, beyond luck, how do I go out marketing a store such as this? I'll give you my first direction. You give me the second one. My first one is look inside. Look inside the store itself, at people who are working there with you. Look inside your community, at people who might have that interest. The man or woman who has the cafe may also be interested in a relationship there. Small towns are everybody's going to know everybody, and so start a conversation in an intelligent way, and you might just be able to find something internally. Now, realistically, most of the time, that person is not necessarily going to have big piles of cash sitting around, and so that has to be dealt with in terms of both pricing and the possibility that you may have to finance that with seller financing. But I look internally first. At least, especially in small towns. Now, beyond internally, I don't have, again, a magic wand. I will tell you, I'm going to start with the negative, then we go to a positive, okay? The negative is the temptation to say, I'm going to take out an ad in such and such, or I'm going to respond to used to be you'd receive them as faxes. Nowadays, they're usually emails from somebody who say, well, I'm a business broker. I'm going to sell your business for you. Be leery, be careful. That this is a very specific business, and throwing it out there in sort of a broad net, it's not as easy as you might think, but there are places to certainly start a conversation. And many of the folks who do this for a living, the problem is it's just about as hard to get a deal completed at a small number as it is to get one that's got many more zeros behind it. And the compensation for that broker is, of course, many more zeros larger with the larger deal. So there are very few of the professional brokers that really work in the very, very small stores. And so be careful to make sure that you found one that is actually going to be able to deliver what you think they're going to deliver. That would be my piece of advice. Your thoughts on that, Paul?
I would agree. The only other source that they may have out there is if they do have a supplier that they see regularly and they trust. Sometimes you can let that supplier know that, hey, I'm really thinking about selling the business. You know anybody out there that might have an interest in coming in and take a look at the store? And oftentimes they'll know of people who they run into in other stores. Maybe it's a store owner, or it could be someone who's working in the store who said, I'd really like to own a small town store. So the sources are out there. It's just how you utilize them. It's so important that you keep your store looking nice and current, because if that potential buyer is out there and they're familiar with the fact that you run a pretty nice store, they don't expect it to be a Dillon's or something like that, but they know that you run a nice store in the town you service. The interest is there. But if you've let it get run down, it's not attractive, it's not something that you would want to go in and have to invest a whole lot of money in, you're probably not going to get that deal. But if you keep it looking good and you have satisfied customers in that town, you've got a magnet.
And then the last thing that I heard, and maybe you've got something else, the last thing I heard was that if we had the ability, and again, we don't have that magic wand, but the one thing that we need to think about is how do we solve this question of suppliers and delivery in the small rural setting? And I don't have that answer, but it certainly is a question that maybe we need to keep asking and see if we can find somebody who can help come up with ideas to be able to solve this. Because when we asked him, the one thing he said that he would change if he had the ability would be to be able to find a supplier, a way to get product delivered to these small towns. And truth be told, he's only 15 minutes away from Fredonia. We've got some towns in rural Kansas that are a good deal further from the nearby town. It must be even harder for some of those, and that's got to be a big deal.
And tied into that is his passion to make sure that the people who shop at his stores get prices that are fair. He was not interested in seeing how much margin he could tack onto them because he and his wife were having to go to Wichita to buy some of them. He just wanted them to be fair. And I thought that was a real compliment to him and the way he does business.
Well, anything else that you saw or any thoughts that you have, Paul, as we wrap up this time?
I'm just grateful that we got to speak with Dave this afternoon. I found it to be a very rewarding experience, and want to thank him again for taking the time. Yeah, today we're going to be talking with Stacy McCree and find out the reasons that you made this big decision in your life, which is a big decision, to buy this store, and what were some issues. So I'm just going to start with the first question, and then I know Carrie will have some as well. What was your due diligence process? In other words, what information did you want or need before you decided to buy the store?
I started working in the store before I made the decision to buy it because I just wanted to see what it was like. We went back and forth about, a profit and loss statement. And since it's such a small store, Dave and Ruthie are both retired from the post office. So they were just doing it as a favor to the guy who didn't want to do it before them, and weren't really looking at growing it or building it. It was just kind of just, let's just keep it open kind of thing. So I had to spend a lot of time with Dave actually figuring numbers, real numbers, and putting it in an Excel spreadsheet so that I could show my husband that it wasn't going to cost us money to do this, that it was actually going to, it would make money to keep itself afloat. And then if we added items like before we bought it, Dave didn't do breakfast. So we do breakfast and lunch now, and hopefully we get to a point where we might be able to do an early dinner. We've been talking about doing a dinner at least once a month, like a steak dinner or something. But those were the things that we thought about in the very beginning that would bring us more profit as soon as we started.
You know, we get into the numbers sometimes, and obviously we don't want to get into specifics or impose upon your privacy, but tell us a little bit about your startup expenses, if you will. Again, somebody's looking at doing something like this, you know, what kind of reserves were you allowing for as you started this? Just walk us through a little bit of that phase of the business.
I started with 25,000. I put that in the bank and basically told myself, I can't make this work on that $25,000, and it wasn't meant to be. But we bought some equipment. We bought some coolers, some freezers, tables and chairs. That's the money we used to buy the kitchen equipment as well. We burned through it pretty fast, but I had to learn what I could buy from Amcon and what I couldn't buy from Amcon, because they supplied a lot of things. However, and Cisco, both of them, they supplied a lot of the stuff I needed, but not at the price I needed it to be.
Yes.
Because in small communities like this, most of our citizens are on fixed incomes, you know, and they can't afford to pay Wichita prices for lunch and breakfast. So we try to stay as cheap as we can.
Sure.
How many of your market of your customers go into the big city, whatever that is, on a regular basis?
There's not very many.
Really? So there are not many of them that are working in Wichita or working in Fredonia and driving out every day.
Well, Fredonia, yes, but not Wichita. Yeah.
How far is Fredonia?
It's about 15 minutes.
Oh,
Okay. So how much of your business do you think goes to Fredonia for their shopping?
There's probably quite a bit, or Chanute even, because there's the Walmart in Chanute.
Gotcha. So how do you manage that competition with them being 15 to 30 minutes away?
Well, we have a set product list, you know, so Ruthie had this all figured out in her head, and it took me, well, it's almost been a year, so it's taken me that long to figure this out. There are certain items that we always carry, and those are the ones that go fast, you know, like your sour cream, your cottage cheese, milk, baking supplies like flour, sugar, cake mix, things that they just get an idea and, hey, I want to make this, but I want to drive 15 minutes to go get it. So I'm just going to run to the store and grab it real quick.
My question is always, you know, we don't want to paint an overly artificially optimistic picture, but we also don't want to paint a bleak picture either, because others are going to be considering whether this is something they want to do. I guess, you know, we'll talk more about it in the bigger picture, but do you have any thoughts on this decision? Are you still happy with it? And what would you tell other people who are looking at the same kind of a question of do the numbers work and can I do this?
Well, I think I was a little blessed with my husband's income, because for now, he calls it my hobby. But I have goals of eventually one day being able to open more stores like this in other smaller communities. I know that the mayor of Longton has reached out to us and asked us if we'd be willing to open one there. We've had a lot of residents from Toronto in our store asking us if we'd be willing to open one in Toronto. I think that opening in more areas will give me the ability to buy in larger bulk, which will allow my suppliers to give me a bigger discount. I would also be able to buy, I would hope I could get to the point where I can buy enough to order from AWG.
Do you buy from AWG now, or are you buying from just other suppliers?
Nope. AWG doesn't accept anybody who can't order at least 10,000 a week.
No. Do you buy maybe another store? Do they order some for you and then you pick it up and bring it in, or you do anything like that?
I talked to G&W about that, but honestly, their pricing is still higher. I mean, I could drive to Wichita and get stuff from Sam's for less than I can G&W. So I get all my convenience items and some grocery items from Amcon. Cisco supplies us with all of our cafe items, and then Sam's and Dillon's for milk.
So when you look into the future, and obviously all of us have a crack in our crystal ball, but nonetheless, as you look into the future, you say that you're looking at the possibility of trying to open a second store or a third in some of the other small communities nearby. What motivates you to want to do that? You mentioned the idea to give you more buying power if you could go ahead and combine their sales. Talk to us a little more about what that feels like to you. What is the motivation or the image that you have as you think about that future?
Well, for me personally, I love people. I love meeting people, being around people, and I've had people tell me that they like coming here when I'm here, and I feel like I should spread that out more, you know, in other areas. Get to know more people and hopefully be a positive influence on different communities and show other people how to take something that is nothing and turn it into a business.
Wonderful. You know, towards that end, I guess, what advice would you give somebody else coming into this same sort of an opportunity in another town? You know, what would you suggest that they keep in mind, with the good, the bad, and the ugly, if you will?
Definitely sign up for the Rural Grocery Initiative Mentor Program. That was super helpful. Don't be discouraged because you'll get a lot of no's. But just keep asking. I mean, just stick to what you want and just keep asking and pushing until you get people to tell you yes. So I was a buyer at Textron Aviation for almost 10 years. One of the things that I think helped me was knowing that you don't ever just go out and look for one quote. You know, we always did 3. And that day I told you I sat down and applied for as many different accounts as I possibly could. I mean, other than your standard Pepsi, Coke, Frito-Lay, those being the only ones really available. But as far as like the convenience distributors, the tobacco distributors, I applied for probably 10. And I sat down with all of them and I made them show me their pricing before I decided to choose one.
Very wise. Makes good advice. Do your homework is never a bad thing.
Right.
Well,
thank you so very much, Paul. Any last things?
No, this has been a great interview. We really appreciate your time, Stacy. I know you may be the only one working here most of today, so or you've probably got somebody to back you up, but we really appreciate your time and all your comments.
Oh, no problem.
You know, Paul, Stacy is magnificent. She just impresses the bejeebers out of me. But not everybody gets to come into a situation quite like this. I mean, she got in for a very low entry number. She's coming in with another source of income from her spouse and also from her own savings. And so she can do this in some ways as kind of a labor of love. Not everybody can afford to come in as a working for free. She's got great plans to be able to make money and to grow this into a profitable business. But definitely she's in a unique situation to come in where she started. What do you see when you look at normally the situation where someone's coming in and they don't have maybe quite all these unique situations or advantages? What are you seeing in terms of what it takes to get started in a relatively small market, but an existing store, and make this thing actually function and be able to pay for itself?
Well, no matter how small the market, the individual has to have some business acumen. One thing that she mentioned, she just passed over it quickly, but where she had been before, she had learned about things like inventory control, which really ties to cash management. The most difficult thing that a lot of people run into when they go into a new business and they have not been in one before is the management of cash. Because in retail, cash is everything. It's how you buy your inventory, it's how you pay for your help, it's how you pay for all your expenses. And if you don't know how to do certain things like generate the right kind of margins to generate that cash, you can really run into trouble. So I think having business acumen is part of that. And it's interesting, she mentioned the mentoring program that Kansas has out there in the rural grocery group. Man, that's important. If you've never been in a business before, you may have all the desire in the world, but there are a lot of things out there that you're not going to know about unless someone can help you work through them. And I really think, Carrie, that mentoring process could be really, really important too.
Well, and from my point of view, again, I'm the lawyer with the background in finance, so I've got to look at it from that point of view as well. I would actually encourage anybody who's looking at doing this to do the equivalent of what the SBA or what your banker would say. They would require some form of a legitimate projection or pro forma. Yes, you look at the previous numbers and then you look at what's going to change going forward, and you understand how that all fits together. Because even if you're not going to a bank, that means you are the bank. And the same way the bank doesn't want you to default on them, you shouldn't want you to default on you either. So you really have to hold yourself to that kind of standard and make sure the numbers actually work. Along those same lines is the old saying, if you got your head in the oven and your feet in the freezer, on the average, you're comfortable. That cash flow piece of this, the reserves that are necessary to survive the lean times, really has to be understood and has to be managed very, very carefully. That's a big part of what you'll get from the pro forma, understanding where the highs and lows are and being able to project how much of a reserve you really have to be able to survive the inevitable ups and downs of being in business.
Well, and she's doing some things that could really be costly if she hadn't done her homework, and obviously she has. Putting a kitchen in the store, which is like, I guess in this store that would be their deli. Those can be very costly if you don't know what you're doing. You can sell a lot of biscuits and gravy, but you might be selling them less than they cost you to put them together, and that can be a disaster over time. I think what I heard from her, though, as she went through here, she's really used a good thought process as she's gone. We're looking for characteristics of what's expected. It's individuals who can look at the numbers and really begin to understand their implications in the business. And I felt pretty comfortable she's there. But for somebody who's never done this before, it's really good if you can work with someone who maybe has the experience to help you work through the numbers. The sourcing issue is huge. And she had the initiative to go out and find people who would sell to her. I'm not sure a lot of people have that kind of determination. I mean, she's an extremely determined person. And she has a vision. That's the other thing. She has a vision of where she would like to go. And that's not having just one store. She can visualize some other communities out there that need a store. And I think she's figured out, well, when I can get this down where I know really how to make it work, I'm willing to go out there and look at some other places. She had a really powerful message. She went in with a plan, and we've kind of overlooked it. But one of the things that she said is, I worked in the store first. So she really then was able to make the decision that, yeah, I think I can do this. Had they just come in with rose-colored glasses and plopped the money down, I'm not sure it would have worked.
Absolutely. And I do think she's going to succeed. I think we'll be talking about her 5 years from now still being a successful grocer, probably with multiple locations. And that's a wonderful story to tell. I also think you're right, though, Paul, that we've got to be careful we don't wind up with the HGTV or a Food Network syndrome where everybody suddenly thinks, well, it's easy. I can open a restaurant. Everybody can. It's not quite that easy. That's the cautionary tale is get the support, get the advice, get the mentoring, do the numbers, take your time, understand what you're getting into, and go in with your eyes open. With your eyes open, this can be a beautiful experience, but you need to know what you're getting into.
All right. Well, that was the end of our recording. Thank you so much to Paul, Carrie, Dave, and Stacy for sharing all of your insights. We do have some time now. We have about 10 minutes for Q&A. So I'm going to ask Dave and Stacy, who are both here, as well as Paul, to unmute themselves, turn their videos back on. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Ryle, who has been monitoring the chat box to help lead this part of the webinar.
Yes, thank you so much. That was I really enjoyed hearing your experiences, your perspectives on this, and I think we can get into a couple of questions now to just pull out some of the themes. So obviously one of the themes that came up a couple of times throughout the conversation was the role of mentorship. And Stacy, you really had a mentor in Dave and Ruthie, and then you also were able to participate in the Rural Grocery Initiative's mentorship program. So could you just talk, Stacy, a little bit about the role that mentorship played? And then I have a follow-up question that came in related to local sourcing, which I know is something you worked on with the mentorship through RGI. So first off, the role of mentorship in this transition, Stacy.
I don't think I could have done it without the mentorship. With Ruthie, it was more about the products that are on the shelves, you know, what sold, what doesn't sell, where you get what from. I had to learn her routine first and then try to figure out how I wanted to do my own routine. And then with Dave, it was mentoring me on employees, when to work certain people, who can close, items like that. But I honestly believe that they were a huge help. I wouldn't have been able to do it without them.
Yeah, it really highlights the just multifaceted nature of grocery operations, that there are skills that you bring to the table, like you talked about knowing to ask for 3 quotes from Textron, from your experience there, and then you're able to pull from Dave and Ruthie to just close out the experience to help you get going. So then another theme that's related to the Rural Grocery Initiative mentorship program was distribution. And so one question came in about local sourcing. And I know that was something you kind of worked on a little bit as you got started in this store. Can you talk about some of your goals related to local sourcing and kind of what work you've done to consider that, considering some of the challenges you face as a small store trying to work with distributors?
Well, that was where Brooke came into play, because she helped me figure out what
I could do as far as buying from local suppliers, say someone's growing tomatoes, how I could go about buying them from local residents rather than having to go to the store to purchase them. She helped me find a whole bunch of documentation on the rules and the guides on doing all of that stuff. As far as any local distributors, though, I can't think of any that we have.
Oh, really? Just the ones your Amcon and things like that.
Yeah,
Chris?
but Amcon's out of Arkansas.
And what role do you think local grocery or local sourcing can play for your small town grocery store? Have you found that you're able to acquire a more consistent offerings from some of your local producers or vendors, or is it just one more option to add to the table if a wholesaler doesn't quite work out?
Well, it's funny that you asked that because in the town of Fall River itself, we're full of ranchers, cattle ranchers. We have an abundance of meat here. It would be real easy to carry local meat from our local farmers. However, with the requirements, with the USDA requirements, we're not allowed to, because the only options we have are Fredonia. There is a new one coming here soon. We're hoping that that's going to be one that we can actually start buying from, but right before, or I think it was after COVID hit, the processing houses tripled their price per pound. So that made it to where you could buy local meat, but I don't know that anybody really cares if it's local, if it's going to cost 3 times as much.
Sure. So sounds like there's some give and take there, that it's not always a definite solution to be working with local producers, and then it may not always be a definite solution to be working with a wholesaler. So another thing that I know is a key aspect of Fall River that we haven't really touched on a lot today is related to the lake near the store and how that is an important component to the success of the store. Can you talk just a little bit about what the lake means to the store and how you all have adjusted your offerings to kind of harness some of the energy from the lake traffic?
Oh yeah, even when Dave and Ruthie owned it, Ruthie would have, if you were going to go camping, there would be anything that you need for your camping there. Bug spray, suntan lotion. I think the only thing we probably don't have in the store, life vests. One of the things that my husband and I did after buying it, though, was we went and bought these 10-foot by 5-foot signs, and we had them hung on both entrances to the lake. So we believe that was last summer. We saw a lot of increase customers from those signs.
Yeah, that's great.
During the pandemic, lake traffic really picked up. That was what, 2020?
Mm-hmm.
Because people maybe they're supposed to be staying at home, but they weren't. They'd come out to the lake and they would camp. And so our business at the store really picked up in 2020, which led to 2021. Like, people rediscovered Fall River Lake in 2020, and then in 2021 they kept coming out because it's a nice drive to get away from the city, and people want to be away from the big cities. So we saw an increase in traffic there, and that's where you gear your mind towards supplying what people need to camp with: your graham crackers, your marshmallows, your Hershey bars, worms, propane, yeah, whatever somebody needs to stay at the lake with.
Sure. Well, I think that is all the time we have for questions. I do just want to thank you all again. Thank you, Paul, and Carrie, who couldn't make it today, but thank you both for facilitating this conversation. And then Dave and Stacy, we really appreciate your time to share your story. I love the fact that St. Patrick's Day has such a prevalent focal point in this story. That was kind of when this story really got started for the relationship between Dave and Stacy. And so I love that we're able to highlight it just a couple years later on this webinar. So I'm going to turn it over to Erica, and she's going to wrap us up with just a few final closing remarks.
All right, thank you. Yeah, that was just a wonderful conversation. Thanks so much again. Just to wrap things up real quick, as always, we do have a survey at the end of these webinars. Ryle is going to post a link to that survey in the chat. We just really want to hear your feedback. We want to know what was helpful in this webinar and what do you still want from future webinars on succession planning. It should take just 1 to 2 minutes, but it really does help us as we develop future programming. Next, we wanted to remind you that the National Rural Grocery Summit is happening June 20th and 21st in Wichita. We're really excited about it. It's a really great opportunity to just reconnect with each other, learn from each other, and strategize about maintaining grocery stores in rural communities. So we would really love to see you there. Registration is open, and be sure to register soon so that you can get that early bird rate. And we should also be posting a link to that in the chat as well. And we're really grateful to some sponsors who are able to provide scholarship funding to the summit. So this helps with travel. The scholarships can be used for registration, lodging, and travel to the summit. We do have limited funding, however, for travel scholarships. So we do have an application for the scholarship. To access the application and to learn more details about the scholarship, you can find all of that information again on our website. The link is down there at the bottom, but we'll post that in the chat as well. And finally, we just wanted to wrap up and remind you to mark your calendars for the next webinar in the series, which will be on April 21st at 1:30 p.m. Central. So thank you all again so much for joining us today, and we will see you next month. Take care.